My pleasure to welcome. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the virtual Tucson Tech Talk series. Today's event is on Building Tomorrow Together, a sector by sector outlook. Before I move forward, I'd like to remind you all that if you could do us a favor and please make sure to turn your cameras off and keep your microphones off or stay muted. We'd like to make sure that the focus and the attention is on the panelists and the moderators for this morning. Thank you so much. For today's event, all of the questions can be put in the chat area and the moderator will compile the questions and pull from there. There are currently sponsorships available for future speaker series events and all future Arizona Technology Council events. And for all of those events, please be sure to visit our website at aztechcouncil.org or be sure to email Jamie or myself, and that contact information will be found in the chat. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's moderator. She really needs no introduction, but if you have not had the opportunity to meet and connect with her, Barbara Coffey serves as the Director of Economic Initiatives for the City of Tucson. She is responsible for the city's economic development strategy, which includes local business retention, expansion programs, business attraction, small business and entrepreneurial development, and business ombudsman activities. Her division is also responsible for annexation and the economic development and the workforce grants program. Without further ado, please welcome Barbara Coffey. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Carla. And I can't say that word either. I'm going to change that in my bio, but it does kind of capture all the things that we do. So again, this is great. I'm so honored to be part of this opportunity to moderate a discussion on economic development efforts in our region. That is where I spend most of my time and along with my panelists. So I'll introduce them now. Dr. John Moffitt is director of the Pima County Economic Development Office. John is a native of Tucson and a graduate of Catalina High School and the University of Arizona. His undergraduate degree is in business administration, and he also has an MBA and an MS in computer science, and his PhD is in education administration and computer science. He has decades of experience in the information technology industry and has led international software development and IT consulting firms. And like most of us in economic development, we come to it in a variety of pathways, so that was no surprise. In his current role, John works to attract new jobs to the region and oversees the development of the 500-acre aerospace research campus and implementation of the county's Opportunity Zone and Economic Development Plan. Susan Hyatt-Dumont has more than 15 years of experience in economic development, working at the state, regional, and local levels. Susan joined Sun Corridor, Inc. in June 2017 as Vice President of Economic Development. Susan provides site selection assistance and market analysis for companies considering expansion or relocation opportunities in Metro Tucson and Southern Arizona. Previously, Susan served as Vice President of Business Expansion for the Arizona Commerce Authority in Tucson. Prior to moving to Tucson, Susan spent 10 years at the City of Phoenix, leading economic development programs and projects. She's assisted companies that have created more than 15,000 jobs and more than $1 billion in capital investment in Arizona. She has a BA from Indiana's DePaul University and a Master of Public Administration from Baruch College, City University of New York. So welcome, Susan and John. It's kind of like a regular monthly meeting for us. But right. Seriously, yeah, I know we do. We meet often. We work closely together. I appreciate that collaboration. So again, something we can talk about. But people often ask us what it is we do and how does what we do differ from that of our counterparts in local economic development. And what I like to say is that more of us doing economic development, the better. It increases our conversations, the opportunities that come into the funnel, that translates into more opportunities at the end of the day for our region, more locations, more expansion. So let's get started. We've got a series of questions that I want to throw out to you both and get that conversation started. And then I do encourage everyone who's listening to put questions in the chat and we'll throw those in as well. So let's talk about this past year, what we all experienced during this pandemic. If each of you could share from your perspective, how have your economic development efforts been impacted by COVID-19? What did you see over this past 15 months? And Susan, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to join this conversation. And as Barbara said, it kind of feels like a a regular week where we're talking about, or a regular day where we're talking about or having conversations. Usually we're talking very specifically about projects. And I would add to what Barbara says, believe me, there's plenty of work to go around for all of us. And each of us has a role when it comes to working on these sometimes very complex economic development projects. The past year, it's been interesting, right? I think we'd all agree to that. We knew when it started that we didn't know where things were going. There were so many unknowns. And I would say, I remember in March of 2020, March 12th, in fact, I was in Atlanta. I got back to Tucson on a Thursday, and the following Monday, our office closed and I didn't go in it again for quite some time. And there were so many unknowns in that first, I'll call it 6 to 8 weeks. And it was very, very quiet. We saw very little activity, very few conversations. And those that we were having were projects we had been kind of in the throes of making decisions. And they all said, we're not making any decisions right now. We're hitting the pause button. We're not saying we're canceling. Most did not cancel. They just said, we can't make any decisions right now. And so we used that time to really reach out to local companies and try to understand what they were experiencing, what they were working through. And it was very insightful, tried to help them in any way that we could. And so then in May, things started to pick up. And we went from 2 projects in April, which is very, very few, to 9 in May. And we thought, well, it's just pent up demand. But then that seemed to continue. It's leveled out a little bit over the last couple of months, but we've had really, really steady activity. And for me, and I can get into this later, it was a little bit surprising because we just didn't know what to expect. And I'll pause there. And I always assume that everybody knows who Sun Corridor is and what we do. But I'll just pause quickly to say, we are a regional economic development organization. We're a private nonprofit. And what we do is focus on attracting primary base employers to Tucson and Southern Arizona. And we also work with existing companies that are primary base employers to help them should they choose to expand in Tucson. So I just want to be clear kind of about what our piece of the economic development pie is. It's really focused on that area. And I'll pause there so John can give his comments.
Fantastic. Yeah, John, what was happening in your world? What was happening in Pima County?
Well, health. The county with the primary responsibility for health, essentially most of our efforts, both from the top down, was focused on getting the health issues under control. And so that that diverted a number of things away from economic development. But as Susan said, the pipeline, it slowed down a little bit, but it did not stop. And the other thing that we really had to focus on was the small businesses and trying to get recovery. We worked with Barbara on a Hound, which was a thing to drive business to small businesses, and a number of other things that just trying to get people through this where they could survive. The other thing is Pima County runs the One Stop, and so they handled all the displaced workers that were laid off as companies had to shut down. So we instead of being the mainstream dealing with projects so much, we wound up having to, be very agile, is the term I use, in working with a number of companies. But we did see kind of a refocus away from office, and everybody pretty much has read about this, but nobody knows what the future of office occupancy is, and where we had some, people looking at locating offices here. it's really refocused to logistics, distribution, and manufacturing, which is good. We're in a good location. Jaime, who you'll hear from later, is right in a perfect position to understand where all this logistics benefits are. But so anyway, that was kind of a rambling answer, but we had a very broad base of activity.
I think it was a good thing, right, John? We had that industrial activity was still lurking. It was still strong. And as Susan said, it came back pretty quickly in the summertime where companies were reaching out again, expansions were being contemplated, and we were able to keep moving. Even while that small business, that restaurant and hospitality and tourism industry took a real hit. So let's talk about that. Susan, Sun Corridor recently released its Pivot Playbook for economic development. Talk a little bit about that, how it outlines some of the strategies that you see for recovery. What are we going to be focused on now?
Sure. So if you haven't heard, I believe it was May 20th, we released a report called the Pivot Playbook. And I'd like to point out that while Sun Corridor released it, it really was a collaboration among many players and a true community effort. So there are 5 key components of the Pivot Playbook. And I should say the Pivot Playbook is focused on the recovery for the entire region. So I defined what we do in economic development, which is really focusing on recruitment of new companies and helping existing companies expand. This Pivot Playbook is much broader than that. While company recruitment is a portion of it, it also focuses on talent recruitment and retention. That was led by Alex Horvath at TMC, focusing on how do we bring new folks into the region and support them and make sure that they stay here and that it's attractive for them and their families. Workforce development and training is a really critical component. It's always important in economic development and in attraction and recruitment efforts. For us as a region, because of our strong tourism and hospitality industry, folks in that industry were disproportionately affected because of the pandemic and found themselves losing jobs overnight. So Lee Lambert with Pima Community College and his team are really focused on how do we help those folks reskill and retool and get into perhaps other jobs if the job they had before may not exist. And near and dear to my heart is shovel ready and real estate offerings. That certainly ties into company recruitment. That was led by Chuck Huckleberry, our county administrator, and that team really focused on looking at what's available in the region in terms of land offerings. I think we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I think it's deceptive to drive down the freeway and see all this land and think, well, we've got land for miles. What do you mean we're limited on what we have to offer? So they really took an in-depth analysis of what sites are available and what are currently shovel ready and what are in a position to become shovel ready. And then last, but certainly not least, was tourism recovery, led by Brent DeRod with Visit Tucson. And they looked at how do we get people to come visit Tucson again and to feel safe in doing so and to support that industry and their efforts to bounce back. The report is quite lengthy. I mean, gosh, we could talk for quite some time about it. I'll leave it there and just suggest that if you haven't, if you're not into, reading a 50-page report, I would encourage you to go to our website. We actually produced a video. It's about 25, 30 minutes, but it really goes through each section and outlines what the issue is, what the challenges are, and what the recommendations are from each of these subcommittees.
Yeah, feel free to put that link, Susan, in the chat so people
I
can
will.
find it. You know, I think you touched on a few things, and certainly the tourism side of things. When I think about recovery, it's important that our visitor experience is what it is, because that actually is often the first time those C-level executives who are making company relocations decisions, they're in our community as a visitor often for the first time, and then we wow them, right, and we're able to bring them back. And I was glad you mentioned again the county's leadership on the shovel-ready sites too. And so, John, you know, again, I appreciate the county's partnership. I've been in other markets where you know, there may not have been as proactive when it comes to land and economic development. So, so let's talk about that. And, you know, we've had comments in the media where Tucson is positioned to recover more quickly than other places coming out of this pandemic. How do you see it, John? And what's the county's role there?
Well, number one, I'm very optimistic about it. And again, you know, what we see, and you know, was during the height of the pandemic and everything, but we're still seeing this trend of people wanting to move out of the high density areas. You know, we've got the climate, the lifestyle, you know, although this week maybe climate's not the right week to talk about it, but but we do have the lifestyle. We have open spaces, and the good thing is, you know, people are starting to pay attention more and more to Arizona. And, you know, Phoenix is very hot, but there are a lot of companies that don't want to be in the very high churn area that Phoenix is. So I think that's to our benefit. The other thing that we were focused on, and I think it is an excellent deal, is we really do have a good startup community and tech development. The tech park and innovation work that they're doing, I think really is attracting a number of folks. You know, you mentioned the tourism and that sort of thing, and the one thing that we're really having to deal with at this point in time is workforce. And we've always had pretty good workforce in certain areas. But we have some areas, and certainly construction has been that way in the state now for a while, but aerospace and some of the others are now really picking up on their hiring. And we need to work with JTED, Pima College. I see Stephen Fleming's on from the university. And, you know, there are various programs that we really need to start ramping up. You know, they're good, but we need a bigger bandwidth to get this moving.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's, you know, it's also that size of the city, right? We saw people leaving these urban, more dense areas, and they were able to choose where they wanted to be and have that quality of life. And so our mid-sized cities, the tier that Tucson sits in, I think was poised for that, to be a recipient of that. And so, Susan, when you think about attraction, you know, we want to know what helps make it easier for you. How do we create as a community the right atmosphere so that we have that competitive edge, so that we're better able to win these projects and employment opportunities? What do we need to be doing?
So if I may, I'm gonna go back real quick to the question you were on before about, you know, how we're positioned to recover. I just would like to add that, and it plays into this question that you've just asked, that you know, we started looking at, you know, our targeted industries, and we're going through a process right now of verifying those and making sure that they are the right targeted industries. But it was interesting because, you know, our targeted industries for Sun Corridor and for the region are aerospace and defense, transportation and logistics, bioscience and healthcare, as well as mining and other renewable technologies. And if you look at those industries, well, certainly there are people that go into offices that serve those industries. Largely, they require people to be physically present to do the work. And so we were seeing a lot of, you know, activity in those industries. So because those are targeted industries, which reflect the assets of our region, I think that's what helps put us in a great position as far as recovery goes. And then the other thing is, I mean, I just have to add, as economic developers, we're eternally optimistic. So it's part of the requirement of the job to be optimistic. So you're probably going to hear a lot of optimism. But sorry, back to your next question, which is, you know, I think you said about how do we kind of keep the right atmosphere and make sure that you know, I feel like we had some momentum before the pandemic. I think we've been able to maintain that momentum. I think everything we can do to keep Tucson in a positive light nationally and garner positive attention, no matter what industry or reason. All news that we can gather, you know, whether it's related to rankings at Visit Tucson, really helps to promote, or you know, getting featured because of our efforts, our recovery efforts in the New York Times. Those are things that keep us top of mind. I've said this before in other groups, and I think it bears repeating. We've got to just continue to keep working together. And I'll borrow from those of you that know Ian work. I don't think he's on here today, but he talks about, you know, we need to be the best version of ourselves. And sometimes I get frustrated because I'll hear things about like, we need to be more like fill in the blank. And not that we can't learn lessons from other places and try to implement those, but I really think that as a region, we've got to focus on what our assets are and being the best version of ourselves that we can be. I also think we've got to realize that, sure, we have problems and we have challenges. We certainly need to acknowledge those and work on them. But we also need to pause and understand that every region around the country has their problems and challenges. Ours may be somewhat unique, but we can't get caught up in that we're the only one with these problems. We just have to put our heads down and continue to work on those while also making sure that we're pointing out all the positive things about our community, both in the state and nationally and internationally.
Well, and you mentioned lessons learned. So John, you know, over the last year, what would you say some of the biggest takeaways have been for you in terms of what we do in economic development? And are there some things that we need to do more of or less of after what we've learned? What would you say?
Well, certainly, you know, it's already been mentioned, the shovel-ready availability of shovel-ready properties and everything. We've seen companies, you know, used to come in and want, you know, they would have an 18-month window, 18 to 24 months. Now they want to be in within a year. You know, so there's getting the infrastructure in place and getting proper zoning, which is actually part of the pivot plan that Mr. Huckleberry talked about. The other thing is from a, you know, and I'm repeating this too, but we've really got to keep our training pathways moving. Got to get more people recruited into those programs. I think JTED's a great start where we need to get them in high school and start moving and expanding on that area. You know, the other thing is this is an attractive place to live. And so we're working with Visit Tucson to, you know, they're great at attracting tourism, but we're trying to not refocus, but add focus to come here and live and work. The other thing is, you know, we're seeing more financing money available. It used to be projects chasing money. Now, you know, I'm sure all three of us get calls, but I certainly do and these are mainly East Coast investors, but we've got Harsh from Portland and others that are from the West Coast as well. But these are large, you know, we're working on a $400 million deal at the Keno South deal that's out of Baltimore. You know, the Boston Asia Group's working on several projects here now. So that's a good thing. And it's one of the things that we're seeing that really really is changing and adding to the ability to get some of these things moving.
That's great. And I was looking at the chat too. There's a question from Jan about, have we considered offering economic gardening services to second stage companies as a way to help grow local companies from within? And certainly that's a practice in our comprehensive economic development efforts. I know from the city side, we lean heavily on our partners, right? We have partners in our community that round out that entrepreneurial ecosystem. You mentioned the tech parks, certainly Startup Tucson, and just a host of organizations and folks that help us meet that niche. But feel free if anyone has some additional response to that. I will, and as you're thinking on that, I'm going to throw out sort of a change of tactic. Let's talk about some of the changes that we've seen and how that will impact our ability to do economic development. And we'll start with that, going back to John, how you started talking about office. Changing demands on office, but also industrial space. Susan, what trends are you seeing and what do you expect to see going forward? And especially as you're having conversations with folks that are looking at Tucson as an option for office industrial, what do you think is going to be the trend going forward?
Well, I'll say again, and I know we've kind of already talked about it a lot, but industrial has really just been off the charts this past year. And it has in our region, but it has nationally. It's not unique to our region. It's really, kind of mind-boggling, frankly, how strong industrial has been. And while there's been, this shift underway in how businesses and consumers, shop, the pandemic certainly accelerated that shift. So you pair that with companies that found themselves with maybe, a strategy of, I've got one, maybe one facility in the US or maybe two, one East Coast, one West Coast. And they found out that, they would have an outbreak, let's say, at that facility of COVID, and it gets shut down or their operations are significantly curtailed. It was extremely challenging for them. And so we've seen companies look at diversifying their footprints, both, internationally and domestically, to make sure that they don't have all their, eggs in one basket, so to speak. So I think that's driven that industrial demand, and I don't see that slowing down anytime in the foreseeable future. I talked to one local broker, and he's been in the business for a while. He said he, in 30 years, has never experienced what he is experiencing right now. And it's not a fleeting, 6-week trend. It's been this way for a year. And then I talked to another broker who is in Phoenix, but handles a lot of national accounts. And he reflected the same thing. He said, I can barely keep up. Please let me know if you have anything available, in terms of existing buildings. I mean, there's just not much available nationally. And there certainly is very little available in the market. So I think that will continue. I think office is, I don't know, it's still a big question mark on what's going to happen. And, I've heard everything from, there are companies never going back, to others that say, oh, no, they're going back and it'll be in the fall and it's all going to change. So I think there's a lot of variation in thinking on that. And I wouldn't begin to venture to guess exactly what that's going to look like. But it seems like it's going to have to be some sort of hybrid at a minimum. People are going to have to go into an office occasionally.
Yeah, I like you, I heard a few different things as we were going through the year. In some cases, brokers were saying, well, clients wanted more office space, so they want more square footage to spread everybody out. Again, how that will change, but then the hybrid model, you know, are they just going back to sort of the workspace sharing where people are coming in and out? So what does that make a smaller footprint going forward? I think it's always in flux. John, what I really remembered as COVID hit, it was just a couple months ahead of that, when we opened and celebrated the Southern New Hampshire University moving in downtown, for example. And then I thought, oh, you know, all those people, we relocated all the new people that were hired and starting work. And I'm curious, I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot with this one, if you've heard, you know, what their plans are, but in more of the student services sector that, you know, in handling calls and administrative functions, you know, what is a company like that doing? And, you know, do you have some feedback on that yet?
Well, they were already pretty agile from the standpoint that they were very much an internet-based operation, at least what they were locating here. They do have a campus back east, but so they were able to, you know, have some people in the office, but they were able also to disperse people, and they just put a smartphone system in and handle things. But you know, we've seen others though that you know, that when things really shut down in the spring of 2020, that you know the demand just kind of went away, and so we've had some layoffs, and we've had to deal with that as well. Certainly, the thing that we're seeing now with the 75 East Broadway project and some of the others is that people are looking at not just an office building. It's office building, parking, and apartments, or you know, where they have kind of a work and live environment. So that's been a change also. But certainly the technology issues, you know, the broad, you know, it's got a label called broadband, but a lot of companies really did make a big step up on that, where they can diversify their workforce. You know, we made an effort, the city and the county worked with Startup Tucson on this, you know, relocating certain people that could telecommute to the area. And I think, you know, we played the lifestyle card and all those things, and it was very successful. They had, you know, over 170 or 80 applicants in the first like 8 or 9 hours. So that shows that there is interest in our area.
Yeah, and you touch on it, and you're the IT expert, so you know the importance of that, the digital environment, the connectivity, the speeds, the options, right, to be a plug and play community for economic development. So I think that you'll continue to see our emphasis on that from the city side as well. And you know, what about reshoring? Maybe either of you can talk about that. But John, Susan, how do company reshoring efforts impact Tucson, and do we stand to gain from that?
Well, I think and number one, the supply chain thing has really come forward, and you know, and again, we've got Jaime on from you know, Southern Arizona, and you know, but we're seeing a lot of activity with the index operations down in Nogales, a lot of reshoring going on there. But there's also the combination where sometimes they want the engineering and some of that kind of focus to be on this side of the border, but they can quickly get to a manufacturing site on the other side instead of spending a week traveling to the Far East. So it's really having a major impact, I believe, in Sonora. And other parts of Mexico also, but Hermosillo just got a couple of big wins. I know that the shelters down in Nogales are also seeing a lot of activity, which also brings activity this way. You know, there's a border there, but Arizona has very traditionally not had a separation. There's been a lot of cross-border activity. And I think that we're going to see more of that.
That's awesome. And I've been listening to the conversations that my Canadian economic developer friends have been having too, about getting that border open and how important that is really for their country as well, but both of us. And so it happens, on both sides in North America. So, if we think about the challenges now, I know you've touched on a few things. We know we need existing space. We need some of these, we need workforce. But are there some challenges that we haven't touched on that face Tucson and our region that would hinder our recovery? Susan, does anything else come to mind? What do we need to be thinking about?
Well,
Or yeah,
Go ahead.
I think one of the key areas is the availability of land for homes and for industrial development. The three of us are always looking for sites. It used to be where we had a good availability of land. It was much less expensive than other locations. The costs are still very competitive, but the availability of parcels of land for these large, if you need 40 acres or more, there's just not very much available. The same is happening in the home building industry. As more and more people come here, they need places to live, and we're working with land advisors and some of those folks to work with state land to release some of the land. If you look at a map of Tucson and southern Arizona, actually, because it's limiting down in Nogales, there's around Fort Huachuca and everything else, but state land controls pretty much everything south of Tucson, between Tucson and Sahuarita, and east of Sahuarita as well. And our growth area, we expect that some of that growth is going to start out to the west now along 86. And thank goodness ADOT's been expanding that highway. But there's the availability of infrastructure and land for homes as well as industrial sites, I think, is one of our biggest issues.
Yeah, I agree, and well said, John. In the Pivot Playbook and the print version, there's a map in the shovel ready section, and I think the map really speaks for itself and can describe, just by looking at it, what the challenge is, because it illustrates the lands that are preserves, lands that are in floodplains, and not that those can never be developed, but they present tremendous challenges for development. Land owned by the Arizona State Land Department, as well as other federal land. And you start to see, in looking at that map, that our opportunities are limited in terms of development. And then it's not just the land, like John said. I mean, okay, so you find the land that maybe is privately owned and has the right infrastructure, or I'm sorry, getting to that, it may or may not have the right infrastructure to it, and there can be tremendous costs associated with bringing the infrastructure there. But I definitely think that's one of our biggest challenges. And of course, we focus on the business side and bringing businesses and having locations for them. But John is right to point out it's also a challenge in the home building industry, where they're also seeking sites. And the housing issue, we talk about it a lot locally, but I've read a lot, and it is an issue nationally with the increase in home prices. And ours has certainly gone up, but there are other markets, even competitor markets to us, that are seeing similar increases. I would just say, another challenge that I would bring up is related to workforce, and kind of call it the mismatch of people's skill sets with the types of jobs that are available. Workforce development is complicated, difficult work. And I really have a lot of admiration for the folks that do it. Work closely with Pima County One Stop, Pima Community College, but really trying to get more of those folks to have a high school equivalency or greater, and get them skilled up to, we'll call it an associate's level, or at least get the proper training that's needed, I think is going to be really important for our region going forward. It is a challenge, and it's one that, you know, it's not going to be solved overnight. But as I said earlier, I think we've just got to put our heads down and really get to work on that particular issue.
Can
I
I
agree.
add one thing to that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
You know, certainly the need for career technical education, you know, I mentioned this earlier, but in you know, starting to, we have a lot of people that get out of high school and don't have a plan, and getting some of these folks channeled and informing them of, you know, these are good jobs out there. Some of these jobs pay $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, and we don't have. I don't think we have the root system that channels them into the JTEDs and the Pima College programs and that sort of thing. So that I think a community emphasis on career technical education type, you know, or career education, as opposed to everybody having to have a 4-year degree. You know, the pendulum swings back and forth, and I think we're really short on the career side right now.
No, and I think we're being way more creative, right? There are alternative ways to get the training that's needed, the certifications, right? I mean, we're talking about, we have a tech audience here, right? So just some of those tech related credentials, they don't require the full academic kind of course load, right? You can do your, you know, your 9 weeks, your 12 weeks maybe, and have a credential that gets you into that workplace. So I think that is important. And I think we need a variety of those options for folks and keep that available. So let's just take a moment, think about winners and losers. I never like to think about losers, but just from the standpoint of, you know, who were the winners and who were the losers over this past year, and how do we address the effects of that? Susan, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I'm with you, Barbara, on that. I'm like, oh, I don't, but it's something I guess, you know, we need to definitely think about and pay attention to, and think about maybe how we can help those folks. So as far as winners, you know, they're the companies that were able to pivot quickly and use technology to continue to deliver their product or service to their customers. You know, as kind of a broad, who are the winners? Obviously, logistics firms and e-commerce were very big winners. I don't think that's a secret to anyone, but it is sort of astounding. I mean, Amazon is obviously at the pinnacle of that. They're not the only one, but they are at the pinnacle. And I was just looking up some stats on Amazon, and I just found it's unbelievable. I mean, their sales increased by, you know, 40% in the US, but internationally they increased by more than 60%. You know, they broke a record in Q4 2020 for you know, net income, and then they broke it again and they tripled it in Q1 2021 to $8.1 billion. And it's just sort of, it's hard to wrap your mind around it, quite frankly. But, you know, we've seen a lot of activity from Amazon in the region. I think we'll continue to see activity from them and other e-commerce companies, or those that are shifting, maybe that were traditional brick and mortar retail, that are shifting to e-commerce, you know, going forward. Some did it well, and some are frankly still struggling with it, and their numbers reflect that. As far as, you know, who was the greatest disadvantage, I'd like to maybe term it that way a little bit more than losers, but you know, this recession obviously impacted the tourism and hospitality industry disproportionately. You know, when we would talk to our partners at Visit Tucson, and it was really difficult to hear what they and their constituency were experiencing, particularly when all of a sudden, we were busy, we had a lot of activity, and it was just so strange, frankly, and really different than any other recession, in recent memory, certainly different than the Great Recession and all of the factors that impacted the Great Recession. So I think going back to our challenges around workforce, I think that, we have an obligation to really try to help those folks who were most impacted with reskilling and retooling into jobs where they can still be successful. And that may be, a completely different career path than they had imagined for themselves. But I think that's really where we've got to focus our efforts.
I know from the city's perspective, we spent a lot of time focused on those who might have been at a disadvantage with small business lending. Our vulnerable populations, small business owners, maybe English is not their first language. We spent a lot of time thinking and looking at ways and then reaching out to those populations as best as we could to provide access to the resources and some help when they were getting overlooked for the loan programs and things like that. So I think that's why you see this continued emphasis on that nationally to bring that kind of relief and support going forward. So John, what else were you seeing in terms of winning and losing?
Well, certainly, Susan covered most of the distribution logistics folks, but I think the technology world actually, it brought more focus to the technology world and the ability to do a lot of work without a physical presence. But I think the real and I'll use the bad word, but losers in this were the small business folks. They small businesses typically, and I ran a small business for 40 years, and we were successful and we had reserves built up and stuff like that because we went through 2 pretty good recessions in my tenure. But a lot of small businesses are, they do not have reserves. They do not have control over their supply chain. They do not have, alternate ways to get their product out to people. And the ones that succeeded were the ones that quickly switched to an Amazon model, signed up with Amazon or got their website going. And the e-commerce thing really trickled down, and it was making some impact on small businesses. It really, those that switched made it. Those that didn't, for the most part, did not. And, what we need to do about this is we need to continue to focus on them, on these small businesses, make sure we get their workforce back because they're very agile from the ability that they're small, but they don't have the ability to retrain a whole bunch of people on things like a large company does. So, and our small business commission is very focused on that. The One Stop is very focused on trying to get workforce back into those locations where we can get these small businesses going. But unfortunately, I think the fatality rate was much higher than we really had hoped. And Tucson's been a small business town for forever. We are seeing large companies starting to come in here, but it was a mom and pop business town for a long time. So I think that's at least my opinion of where the impact was.
And I'm hopeful, like Susan said, we're the optimists, right? We're paid to be optimistic, but we think about, when you think about the last recession in this country, right? Some of the where we lost jobs, but those that came out of it were the innovators, those that produced the concepts like Uber, like, all of these creative, innovative tech companies launching, Airbnb and you name it. And so things came out of difficult times And that's where the invention occurs and the creativity occurs. And so I'm anxious to see what the next 12 months will bring. I want to remind everybody who's listening to ask some questions. We have about 5 minutes left for our panel. If you have some burning questions, put those in the chat. That would be fantastic. And we'll make sure to ask those of our panelists today. And as we're, thinking about that, I want to throw out sort of the rapid fire closing comments in terms of words that you might use to describe how you feel about the next 12 months. Give me 3 words that paint that picture going forward for us here in Southern Arizona coming out of this pandemic. Susan, what are your 3 words?
Well, one of them I think I've said already. And you said it just now, Barbara. I am hopeful. I feel like we're, I'm hopeful about the direction that we're headed. I would also say that I'm eager to be part of that and to be part of the future. And, it's even, so I've lived in Tucson now for 7 years. And even in that 7 years, it's been really fun to watch the evolution and the positive things that have happened in the community. So I'm eager to be part of that recovery effort for our community. And then, I don't know, I'm inspired by the people in this community and the work that they do. And I'm always learning something from somebody here because there's always something new and interesting. And sometimes, especially, stuff out of the university is just sort of mind-boggling, some of the amazing work that's done. So I'm really inspired.
Great. How about you, John?
Well, I'm the eternal optimist also, and I'm, so I was trying to think of what are the really 3 key words, but I'm optimistic, certainly. As you just said, or Susan said, we're excited to be a part of this. This is an exciting time for our community and all of Southern Arizona. We've been kind of tucked away down in the corner. Now we're starting to we're in the spotlight. Supply chain starts to show up and money starts to show up in those. And probably the third thing from the standpoint of the community standpoint is I think this pandemic has made the community much more aware of each other and where our weaknesses are. And there's a lot of money raining down, but we've got to make sure. Sorry, this is not one word, but we've got to make sure that we have sustainability. Okay, that we get back from the low levels and get it onto a sustainable level. But I'm extremely optimistic that for this region. That we can get to that sustainable and continue to grow.
And that sustainability creates the resiliency that we're all looking for. And,
exactly.
And so, and I think we're on that path. I think we have this opportunity and let's work together to make it happen. I want to just appreciate both of you for this conversation. I'm looking to see, there is a question here from David. His question is, what funding to start in-house manufacturing and or workforce training is available in the area and in the state? And I can start, I guess, by saying the city of Tucson, we certainly have a primary jobs incentive program that supports the expansion and relocation of activities related to creating primary jobs. So manufacturing certainly can take advantage of that. We've enjoyed, mayor and council have been long supportive of local financial incentives to attract good industry. We know that we need manufacturing, which is long-term sustainable and jobs for the future that do bring people out of poverty, right? And so we talked about that, how we need to upskill and continue to be competitive. And so we recognize that and we want to support those projects. Maybe John, you can talk about workforce training in terms of what's available there.
Right. Well, certainly, the incentives for new companies to come in are extremely important, but we also have to take care of the expanding and the impacted local companies and the local workforce. So one of the things that the Pima County One Stop was, and it's just one of many, but they have a number of reskilling programs, and a lot of this federal money that's coming down to the county is being sent right into that channel to get folks reskilled into, because some careers just aren't coming back. A lot of the retail folks are just not going to have an opportunity to go back to that. But let's take that, a good retailer's got a lot of other skills, and so let's reskill those things and move them forward. So that's probably the largest area where the county is active. And Pima College has got active programs going on, and as well as some of the contractors for the county.
And I like to dial it in. Sometimes it's maybe 1,000 to 3,000 per employee for job training if they meet certain criteria and they hire from eligible pools. So there are funds for that. Susan, maybe you can touch on a couple of the state programs that might be key to look at.
Yeah, so there is at the state level an income tax credit that's specifically for manufacturers. And I would just, actually, before I go any further, I would say that all the programs at the state level are for any company that's expanding their operations, whether they are in Arizona currently or they're new to the state. Contrary to popular belief, it's actually existing companies that often take advantage more of the incentives at the state level than it necessarily is new companies. You just hear about the new companies more. But that tax credit, particularly, I think what I saw is that, you're talking about starting in-house manufacturing. I think the real advantage of that tax credit is that it is a refundable income tax credit, meaning that if you're starting an operation, often you're investing and you may not be profitable right away because you're making big investments and whatnot. So you can actually get cash back if your income tax liability, if you don't have an income tax liability, you have an opportunity to get that cash back. So I think that is incredibly helpful. And then the other thing I would say on manufacturing is that you're exempt from paying sales tax, state and county sales tax on your electric and gas utilities. So those things are all benefits for manufacturers. We could all go into greater detail if you want to have a separate.
That's great. No, thank you. I mentioned I'll put some links in the chat. We can all add some resources there when we're transitioning to the next panel. So again, thank you very much. This was a great conversation, and I'm sure I'll see you in the next few hours, or at least in 24 hours when we talk about things we're working on. So thanks again. And I am going to introduce our next panel moderator. I'm going to invite everyone to stay right where you are, and just as we do make a transition to just bear with us as we change over spotlighting speakers and that kind of thing. So I'll introduce Dr. Mark Stegeman. He's currently a tenured economics professor in the Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona. He holds a BS in mathematics and has a PhD in economics from MIT. His recent research concerns theoretical models of organizational design. So with that, he's going to organize this next panel. Welcome, Mark. Take it away. Oh, unmute. There you go. Now you go.
You would think I'd mastered that by now. The second half, as previously advertised, will comprise 4 experts who will provide updates and forecasts for 4 economic sectors that are important for Tucson: optics, healthcare, aerospace and defense, and logistics. I will introduce those panelists now and then hand the event off to them. As for the first half, please submit your questions through the chat, and I'm sure we can have many good questions about those sectors, and we will cover as many as possible at the end. Tom Houskin has worked in the optics industry for over 35 years, including market research at Strategies Unlimited, telecom policy at the U.S. Congressional Office of Technology Assessment, and R&D and production positions at Alcatel and Texas Instruments. He joined the Optical Society and today represents the Optical Society, the industry's leading professional association, in 2012. Dr. Sandra Leal will be up next. She's an executive vice president for Tabula Rasa Healthcare. She has had diverse experience as a pharmacist, medical director, and public health clinician. Dr. Leal has led efforts on local and national levels to improve equitable access to healthcare through the integration of pharmacy, public health, and advocacy. And she is currently the president of the American Pharmacists Association. Speaking on aerospace and defense, Callie Groth is the owner and chief executive of Black Bar Engineering, a small firm that specializes in the research, design, development, and deployment of fielded systems in autonomy, signals intelligence, and expeditionary equipment. Prior to Black Bar, Callie consulted for Corel Logic, a Fortune 50 data company, and served as lead consultant for Microsoft Services on change management models. And then finally, they are experts on logistics and supply chains is Jamie Chamberlain, the current president and owner of Chamberlain Distributing. He has been distributing produce in Nogales, Arizona for 34 years and is current board chair for the Greater Nogales Santa Cruz County Port Authority. The governor has also recently appointed Jamie to the Commission on Appellate Court Appointments, which nominates slates of candidates for appointment to state appellate courts, the state Supreme Court, and the Independent Redistricting Commission. So I will hand it now off to Tom to talk about the prospects for optics.
Okay, thanks. First of all, you can see the slide that's in front of you, is that correct? Okay. We could talk all day about the Optics Valley in Tucson, and I would love talking about it, but I'm going to try to make some connections with the greater economy with optics in Optics Valley, and I hope that you'll see some of those connections in other industries as well, and maybe some contrasts as well. So first of all, I'm Tom Hoskin, Senior Industry Advisor at OSA. We are a premier scientific society for promoting and studying the science of light. 22,000 members, 300 corporate members. And in Tucson, you have a very strong Optics Valley cluster, which companies like Raytheon, LaserTel, which is owned by Leonardo, so defense related, but also a great many smaller companies and operations there that serve a lot of different vertical markets. And then the university also, and their optics lab and the observatories in the area. So it's a big, big deal in Tucson. You probably already know that. So as I said, what I'm going to try to do is make some connections, and because this is kind of a broader audience for Tucson and the Sun Corridor and that, I'm going to maybe not talk about optics so much, but try to make some connections to why did the optics and photonics sector do as well as it did. Now, first of all, I want to make it very clear that certainly every company is different. This has been devastating for small businesses. It's of course, on a personal level for families, loved ones, children, it's just been a huge, huge global tragedy. But the optics and photonics industry generally hasn't done as bad as you might expect. Remember, a year ago, we thought this was going to be the economic disaster of our lifetimes, and it hasn't really turned out that way necessarily. Again, if you're in certain hospitality industries and so forth, absolutely devastating. But let's talk about optics. So first of all, one reason that things turned out better than you might have expected, and I didn't necessarily hear this earlier, I heard a lot of really interesting things in the earlier conversation, by the way, is so much of the US economy was considered essential, and a large part of that was considered frontline workers. So this is not just photonics, this is all of the US economy, according to the New York Times, 50 states and the federal government that they surveyed. They came up with 2/3 of jobs were considered essential. Stanford University did a similar study. They came up with half, but a large part of the economy. And of the jobs that weren't considered essential, a large part of those were able to work from home. So this is something that we didn't imagine before the pandemic, that so many people could actually overnight take their work home like this. or were somehow able to keep operations open in some way. Now that was a real surprise to me, because I tend to think that there's a lot more jobs out there doing those sort of things that you can't take home or are not exactly essential. But it turns out there are a lot of those jobs. So that's one major reason that the optics and photonics industry was able to keep going as it was. Of course, there was a disruption. Now, I like to look at the supply side and the demand side. And for this is all industrial output, again, not just optics and photonics, but all industrial output on a month by month basis for the US economy. And you'll see that there was a little bit of a downturn in 2019, but then 2020 it dropped off in April and May, just very steep V-shaped supply curve. And you'll also remember that there were shortages of baking goods and toilet paper and all that. And to some extent, that supply side issue went on, but for the most part, it was resolved very quickly. So there was disruptions, people had to go home, trucks couldn't deliver things in the right places, but for the most part, that worked itself out. Now, in 2021, now you're going to see a surge in the numbers just because of the base effect, which is that when you start doing year-over-year numbers off of some very low number like you have from April and May of last year, you're going to get some really big bounce. It doesn't mean necessarily anything. But there is actually going to be some issues now, and you're hearing about it. Auto industry decided, well, actually, they want those parts after all. They have just-in-time manufacturing. They really need those parts to make those cars. And they can't get them because Asia is making semiconductors for all those laptops that we needed. And there's orders for semiconductors out well into 2022 and displays and so forth. So there are supply chain issues like that. There are ships that are congested at ports, but they will get resolved as well. And the optics and photonics industry wasn't necessarily affected by that because we have a lot of lumpy orders. It's a very lumpy sort of business. There's a lot of inventory. So yeah, disruption, sure, but supply chain problems like you're seeing in some other industries, not so much. There's another thing that was going on. This shows China. So this is industrial output out of China. Notice that little steadier growth there for the most part, and then also it dropped off the cliff earlier, happened there earlier, was shallower, and then recovered much more quickly. So if you remember at the end of March last year, factories in East Asia were already up and running. They somehow managed to get things going because that is their entire economy, is manufacturing the goods for us. And so, and then you see that base effect in early 2021, doesn't mean anything. But I think this is a really interesting chart because this is another really big reason why the optics and photonics industry and a lot of the US and global economy was able to keep running, is because of those factories in Asia. Even if your company in Optics Valley, your small company, large company, even if they're not, doesn't seem like they're directly dealing with these factories in Asia, nonetheless, it kept everything flowing. All you have to do is have a problem in one part of the economy, and then it's going to trickle or propagate through a domino effect to other parts as well. So keeping that running was a really big reason that things weren't worse than they were. Now I'm going to turn to the demand side, and this is not about optics and photonics at all, but I think it's a fun topic. We all can relate to travel, and it gives you an example of how the demand side can affect a sector very prominently. Now, so this shows U.S. air passenger traffic for the period 2019 to 2020. March 1st to February 28th as a normal year. And then in the next chart, you see what happened when the pandemic hit, dropped about 4%, leveled off to about 30 to 40%. And then now in 2021, it's suddenly going up very quickly. Business and international traffic, they say, is behind. It's going to take a long time for that to recover. Maybe not as much as we thought, but just the same, it's going to take some more time. But nonetheless, the traffic is recovering. So even the airline industry, which was devastated by this, like when you look at the numbers, what this did to the airlines, not to mention orders for new planes from Boeing and so forth, it was absolutely devastating. And also, of course, tourism and restaurants and all that. And yet, what we're seeing is that that may come out of this, not better than we expected, but it's kind of recovering as we speak. So that is not the optics and photonics industry. Optics and photonics really wasn't affected demand side Certainly sector by sector, there are issues, but optical communications was strong. Even the national defense security area, disruption, but not really affected that much. And so other reasons why that sector did as well as it did. Now, one other thing that we often don't talk about, financial markets are frothy. What do I mean by this? So you'll see the NASDAQ index is there in the green line going up. That's a 20% average compound growth rate over 5 years. Think about that. Average over the entire 5 years, 20% per year. That's phenomenal. I'm not sure if it's sustainable, but anyway, it's phenomenal. And that's compared to the straight line at the bottom. That's a 7% growth rate, which is what you would expect from the stock market, kind of a healthy growth rate. And then I have something called the US Photonics Index, collected by a colleague of mine. And so we've recreated it here. Don't worry that it's higher than the NASDAQ Composite Index. The point is that it's somewhere in that range. Pick different set of companies, you'll get different results. But it is very healthy. Now, again, what does this have to do with the local industry in Tucson, especially companies that may not really be playing in with some of these kind of companies? Well, it still affects them nonetheless, and for many reasons. Okay, so the companies that are enjoying a lot of the gains in the NASDAQ, this is Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, etc. They're big players in our business. Okay, we make parts that go into their data centers, but also they're doing all this investment in things like LiDAR for self-driving cars and cloud and 5G and augmented reality, virtual reality. And that trickles down, that comes back to the Tucson businesses in little ways. Not to mention also they're hiring students out of the University of Arizona, so it's good for the university as well. So a rising tide raises all boats, even though you think that you're not directly playing into those businesses. Nonetheless, or maybe what it does is it creates the talent shortage and raises salaries, but it does affect you in some way. And in fact, you may have heard of SPACs, the special purpose acquisition companies. There were some 90 to 100 companies doing LiDAR alone for self-driving cars. So this is LiDAR is optical system like radar, but it goes on top of the car. They might need several of them, and they're trying to make them low cost and effective and all this. Well, they can't all survive, but there are already 6 companies. 5 of them have already gone public on the stock exchange. 1 more is still yet to go. There are 2 other companies going through this SPAC process, one of them in quantum computing. That's another hot area, not to mention augmented reality and so on. So all that frothiness in the financial market, again, you may not think that it affects your specific company or even your sector in Tucson, but it does. And so I think that's my last slide. I'll stop there. Again, haven't talked about optics and photonics specifically too much, but I think what I'm trying to get you to see is that the overall global market affects what's going on with that optics and photonics community in Tucson. And that has not been nearly so bad as we might have expected a year ago.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Remember to post questions for everybody that we can answer at the end. The panelists can answer at the end. And we go now to Dr. Liel to talk about healthcare.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you, Tom, for that presentation. I appreciated that you listed the essential and non-essential workers, because healthcare was very essential and continues to be very essential as we're still trying to recover from this pandemic. So just a few key things from the healthcare perspective, and then just my own work. I currently work with Tabula Rasa Healthcare, which was actually a spin out of the University of Arizona College of Pharmacy called Symphonia RX. And we started telehealth back in 2006. So one of the biggest, most dramatic things that occurred during the pandemic and continues to really impact the future of where we're going is just the accelerated digitization. So a lot of focus and shift to telehealth, digital health, remote monitoring to try to figure out how to manage people. So there were sort of 2 worlds, the ambulatory care world, a world where people couldn't go in to see their physicians, couldn't go and see their doctors because of the concerns around the pandemic, and then the world around hospitals that were being crushed and overwhelmed with the volume of patients experiencing COVID and the capacity surges that we saw here. And we were very impacted here in Tucson in particular, and in our state because of the surges that we had here in our community. But the wonderful thing that happened in Tucson in particular was the collaboration between public and private partnerships to be able to do that. And so we are seeing, really a rethinking of how we move forward. How do we now integrate and maintain some of the digital solutions that have been created, but then focusing on things that have already been mentioned by Susan and by John earlier regarding workforce, because what we have right now is a very, very impacted provider group. We have physicians that have been working nonstop for a year and a half, trying to make sure that we're managing the people that have been in the hospital 24/7. So there is a lot of burnout, recruitment. You try to get new providers, try to get staff to come in, technicians and medical assistants, just workforce that we can recruit from, because it's been quite a challenge to be able to sort of give relief to the people that have been out there in the front lines every day, that continue to have to be out there, and then bringing in a new workforce to help support that. And then just filling out positions that we had available and open even before the pandemic happened, because we know we don't even have enough capacity in certain areas. But other things that I wanted to mention, some of the things around manufacturing that have really impacted healthcare have been access to protective personal equipment, vaccinations, and how to work on ability to distribute and deliver vaccines in an effective way. So manufacturing has been very critical, in collaboration again with private public partnerships, to be able to figure out how to make sure we have enough resources in the healthcare space to manage the populations that we work with. And that has a lot of implications on our business community, having a healthy workforce, having the ability to make sure that people are safe. Those are things that we're thinking about a lot. So from an outlook perspective, we are very busy. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a number of people that still need to be vaccinated to be able to fully be functional like we were pre-pandemic. But some of the other areas to really think about are some of the deferred maintenance. Why I say we've been really busy and we will continue to be busy is because we've been mostly focused on the pandemic. We've been mostly focused on trying to make sure people have what they need for that. And so a lot of the routine care kinds of things have been delayed. So what we're trying to do now is catch up to those things, catch up to the routine maintenance, routine, wellness checks, those things that really put people at risk if they're not following their care guidelines. And unfortunately, because there was limited capacity to do those things, or fear to go in, now we're trying to catch up on some of those other items that are very critical to maintain health. So we're seeing conditions like pre-diabetes being impacted because people were not as active during the pandemic. We're seeing mental health becoming a significant challenge, anxiety, behavioral health, and limited access to those types of providers. And even those types of appointments. So really looking at how to leverage telehealth to be able to help meet those needs and recruit those providers to our community where we might already have limited resources to be able to do that. So that's really critical. Other areas of impact, and we have a lot of nursing homes in Arizona, but nursing homes were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So there's been a lot of focus on how to take care of people at home and people in general, being concerned about being in those types of environments. So how do we recover from that? How do we provide safety and security around that? So thinking about how that's changing the future of how we're going to take care of people. Do we still look at those nursing home models, or have more of a hybrid model of stay at home and have some of those care environments to consider? So those are the main areas. I think the biggest other thing to think about is the concept of public health and really being prepared, to prevent this a next time, because we know this isn't going to be the only time we're going to have a virus or some other concern like this. So really doubling down on our efforts, and then looking at ways to be more efficient as a state, as a county, as a community, but then also as a country, because we know that this is not going to be the last time. But how do we prepare more effectively? How do we have playbooks to be better prepared? How do we have stock in basic medications, basic supplies, to be able to prepare to do that? And I think that's where a lot of focus is going to be. I think we're still in the pandemic phase, but that's going to be how we will continue to be busy post-pandemic. So I know we have 2 more speakers, so I don't want to take more time, but I am going to be here for questions. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you this morning.
Thank you, Sandra. We will go next to Kelly Groth to talk about aerospace and defense.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. So the aerospace and defense market is comprised of what really is considered 2 very uneven sectors, commercial aerospace being primarily airlines and your maintenance level depots, and then defense being the Department of the Defense, Department of Energy, and anything related to national security efforts. As most of you know, and as Tom talked about briefly in his overview, the commercial aerospace sector has been dramatically impacted by COVID-19 pandemic, where we've seen a drastic decrease in travel and concomitantly a decrease in demand for aircraft manufacturing and the maintenance level depots that support aircraft operations. At the end of 2020, airline travel was down significantly, and yet, again, as Tom emphasized, we're actually seeing a resurgence in airline travel, specifically in domestic travel. However, as COVID mandates are still being determined, the longevity of this resurgence is still to be determined. Additionally, one of the biggest revenue generators for the commercial airline sector is business travel. And as we all really have transitioned to remote work, and the permanency of remote work is also still be determined, the resurgence and the rebounding of this sector and the recuperating of profits is really kind of yet to be seen going into 2022. Now, defense, on the other hand, which is where I really reside, has remained relatively stable. At the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020, everybody that was a defense contracting company, large and small, received a letter from the Secretary of Defense stating that we were essential businesses and that any programs that were in effect in support of security and national defense were to remain in effect. So where we really saw some issues with these was the programs continued, but we had an issue with a lot of components and their availability. Not only were components not available or not readily available, we also started to see a dramatic unit cost increase. And in turn, what this has done is it has significantly increased delays in contract delivery and pricing. Now, going into the end of fiscal year 2021 and going into the beginning of fiscal year 22, we're seeing a major shift in the types of programs being conducted. That is, as the United States works to remove all boots on the ground in Afghanistan and surrounding war-torn countries, the focus has really shifted to newly emerging threats, predominantly in cyber, air, and missile security threats from specific countries of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. So in order to address these needs, the DoD is really changing its budget and its focus. And they just released the fiscal year 2022 defense budget national security strategy that encompasses $753 billion worth of innovation and modernization of the warfighter. Albeit a small increase, this was a 2% increase from last year's defense budget, and it has allocations of $10.4 billion for cybersecurity, $20.4 billion for missile defense, and $112 billion for research, development, test, and evaluation, RDT&E. The importance of this is that this is the largest ever RDT&E allocation in the history of defense budgets and has heavy emphasis on U.S. manufacturing. Where this is especially vital to Arizona and specifically Tucson is these initiatives are very focused on small businesses and underrepresented areas. While companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, CACI, all of the large defense contractors are going to remain vital assets in the DoD ecosystem, what's happening right now is the sector is working very urgently and very quickly to prohibit all components, the purchasing and integration of all components that are Chinese made. And therefore, they're putting all of this RDT&E allocation into additive manufacturing, the hybridization of combat vehicles, support equipment, and even climate change mitigation. So with that said, the DoD is looking towards small businesses to be able to quickly and very innovatively work to provide 3D printed parts that have additive materials such as Kevlar and carbon fiber. They're looking for new power sources. They're looking for new energy sources and ways to not only lighten how DoD works and the technology that they implement, but also how quickly and effectively they can do it. So this will be very advantageous to small businesses in Tucson that have a lot of this advanced technology capability to work with DoD.
Thank you, Callie. And again, I want to remind everyone to submit questions if you want in the chat, and we'll handle those after we finish with the panelists. For our last sector, logistics, Jamie Chamberlain.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm from Nogales, Arizona. I am a fruit and vegetable distributor. So we import fruits and vegetables from Mexico to North America. We've been doing that. Our company's been doing that for 50 years now, but we've been doing this through Nogales, Arizona for over a century, and supplying fruits and vegetables to retailers and food service companies throughout North America for, like I said, over a century through Nogales, Arizona. So I'm also, that was my day job. I'm also the chairman of the board of the Greater Nogales Santa Cruz County Port Authority. So what we do is we look at the challenges and the opportunities that we have at our ports of entry and look at infrastructure issues to improve the quality of life for our citizens here in Nogales and Santa Cruz County. So we've had an interesting year this year. We always seem to have challenges in our community as far as just the nature of our businesses. So through our community, a little over $30 billion worth of products are traded between the United States and Mexico. And we do all the logistics, the marketing, and the supplying and of that product going through here. That could be anything from parts with Otis Elevators or Samsonite in Nogales, Sonora, through the Index Maquiladora Group, or the fruits and vegetables that we cross every single day. It could be meat, it could be fish, and medical supplies as well. So it's a variety of different things that we do through here, through Nogales. And we're a very small community. We're 22,000 people. We're about a little over 40,000 in Santa Cruz County. But it's incredible the amount and the importance that our community plays in the economic wheel of the state of Arizona and the country as well. It's something that we're very proud of, and it's something that we're looking to grow quite a bit. So we had tremendous challenges, whether they were threats of tariffs or the COVID issue and closing down. Our community pretty much stayed open. We were almost all deemed as essential workers during COVID because the pallets and the crates and the boxes that need to be shipped out to consumers throughout the country, you know, that's done by forklift and pallet jack drivers. So we really need to be in our offices and working on a daily basis. So the majority of the community works in these industries, but we also have a large presence of law enforcement. We have the largest sector of customs for Tucson sector is in Nogales, Arizona. A little over 800 people work at our ports of entry. In Nogales, we have 4 ports of entry. We have the Morley Gate, we have DeConcini Port of Entry, we have the Mariposa Port of Entry, which is mainly commercial, and we have the Nogales Airport as well. And we also have a large presence with Border Patrol here, with one of the largest stations in the southern border as well, in the Nogales Border Patrol Agency. But we also have FDA, USDA here, APHIS, DEA, Metro Task Force. We've got almost every law enforcement agency and that you can think of is in our community. And that created some challenges for us because when we were looking at what the citizens that we needed to vaccinate as soon as possible. We did not consider federal law enforcement. So that was a challenge for our county, and that was our challenge for our clinic, Mariposa Clinic, which helped a great deal with that challenge. And we're very, very proud to say that we have about 82% vaccination rate for Santa Cruz County, which is the best vaccination rate in the state, and one of the best in the country as well. And we did all of this not knowing that we were going to have to vaccinate federal law enforcement as well. So we have a great presence here of those people, but they work in conjunction with the Port Authority and the business leaders here in our community. I should say that the Port Authority encompasses the city of Nogales, the county of Santa Cruz, Index, which is the Maquiladora Association Nogales, Sonora, the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas, Nogales Economic Development Foundation, and the Nogales U.S. Custom House Brokers Association. And we have a new mining cluster membership as well. In that mining cluster, we have South 32 Mining, which is another industry that is now part of the pillar of the community, and a leader in the thought process of how we go forward in this different time. But I'm very interested to hear, and I was very interested to hear a lot of the things that the other panelists are talking about, because I think a lot of the things that you all are talking about, we in Santa Cruz County and in Nogales and on our ports of entry are very much poised to be partners with you, not only in Tucson, but also in Phoenix and throughout the country. We have the great privilege of living on the border. I'm born and raised in this community, and I always say, being a border citizen is a little bit different. We have the advantages of some great cultural ties and familiar ties, but our economic stability is really, really focused on the region. And what you asked, or in the other panel, some people were talking about, what best describes this year and going forward for your business. I look at three different things. I look at opportunity, I look at focus, and I look at promotion. And I have to look at the challenges that we've gone through in this last year, but a lot of them, other than the fact that this major challenge was COVID, a health issue, we have challenges all the time. We say that we're a small community here in 22,000, but every single thing we do is a federal issue. And every problem or every challenge that we have is a federal issue. So we're very much accustomed to going through this adversity, but we're a very resilient community because we have to be. We have no choice. During COVID, we did our mitigation. We closed down our facilities to visitors, but we continue to work inside our facilities. And we see tremendous growth as well. Since 2013 to now, which in 2013, we did the remodel of the Mariposa Port of Entry. We've seen an increase in industrial space and refrigerated space of over 2 million square feet. I myself built a facility that I started on March 20th in 2020 of 60,000 square feet, a refrigerated space, and it was finished on April 10th. So we're up and working now because we saw an opportunity. When the cement companies and the steel companies and the panels for cold room companies and the HVAC companies were shutting down, we were putting our orders in and we were negotiating good prices for them. And I think that the facility was built at an opportune time. But that's what entrepreneurs down here, we look for. We look for the growth and technology that Callie was looking at and Sandra talked about and Tom as well, we are poised to help in any way, shape, or form to help these other businesses grow. And our logistics chain is very mature in this area, and our companies that help with the crossing of all of this business are very, very skilled and knowledgeable about where we go with the different industries that we work with. So I look forward to some questions. I have quite a few statistics about the border and about what we're doing here, but I would like to hear some questions from all of you and from the audience as well.
Thank you, Jamie. Before we go to the questions, I want to announce that everyone who is registered for this will get the recording and Tom's presentation as well by email after the event. So we do have a question entered for Jamie from Greg. What opportunities or threats do you see in your industry, meaning trade and logistics, with the Biden administration and Congress?
Well, I think a lot of people talked about it here in workforce and getting people back to work. For us, one of the biggest problems that we've had or challenges that we've had has been the freight issues that we've had. We just don't have enough drivers and truck drivers to actually get our products throughout the United States. I've been in the business now for 34 years, and my family's been in the business for 50 years. When we first started out, we would send, vegetables, fruits and vegetables to Los Angeles for about $550. That was a long time ago, but the price has increased and did increase right around March, April, and part of May to a little over $3,100 to Los Angeles, which is absolutely ridiculous. We had freight rates going to New Jersey of $12,000 because we just couldn't find enough drivers. The equipment is out there. We just don't have enough drivers that are willing to get our products across the country. I think that's one of our greatest challenges, and that's an opportunity for the tech sector as well. So driverless trucks and the autonomous vehicle industry in Arizona, which is maturing at a really, really fast pace. For someone like myself, we're really, really excited to see that. And we can't wait for that to grow and to mature enough so that we can get our freight rates down to a reasonable price so that our farmers are not being punished in order to get the price to the consumer at a reasonable price. So I think going forward, we see some great opportunities in that space. But it has been a tremendous challenge, and I believe it continues to be a tremendous challenge, not just for organizations like ourselves and businesses like ourselves, but for many other people as well. Callie is saying yes, I can see. So I see that you guys have all gone through this as well.
So while we wait for any other questions to be submitted, I have a quick question for each of you, which is, let's look down the road, getting through the whole COVID situation, assuming we get through it as expected, say 5 years from now. How will your industry look compared to how it would have looked if COVID had never happened? Are there any long-term impacts? Will it look different or not? And if so, what are those impacts? And this is not a scripted question, so I'm catching them by surprise here.
So I'll take a stab at that. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's not going to affect the industry that much. It's very easy to say, oh, if you remember back a year ago and everything was really locked down, you say, oh, the world's changed forever. And we're not going to go back to offices. We're not going to, my employer, we run technical conferences, and there was a concern, wow, people aren't going to go to conferences anymore and all this stuff. And I think for our industry, I can't speak for telehealth, Amazon, the growth in Amazon, all that kind of stuff. That's a different area from what I do. But I think in my sector, I don't think it's going to change that much. I'm interested to hear what happens in other sectors.
Yeah, and I'll go next, Tom. For us, we're really looking at reassessing how we deliver healthcare, even the conversation around real estate. Now with the ability to provide some care through telehealth, it is improving capacity to do some work that where you don't actually require a footprint. But I don't think we're going to ever replace a face-to-face visit. I think what it's going to do is have a combination opportunity, maybe touch points with telehealth, and really trying to use the digital tools to reach people. We are seeing a lot of vertical consolidation in healthcare. If you've read the news, there's mergers and acquisitions, really big health players now. A lot of digital companies like Amazon, they just announced yesterday, and Walmart too, prescription, drug pricing where they can deliver things to your home as opposed to you having to go to the pharmacy, for example. But you still need the care to take medications appropriately. Just because they're less expensive doesn't mean they're appropriate. So you still need the care to do it effectively. And then just some of the things around drug delivery or drug design, drug approvals. The COVID vaccine took less than a year, which was incredible. That was phenomenal. When you looked at the average amount of time a drug gets to market, it's about 8.7 years, 9 years. So we are, as an industry, looking at what efficiencies did we learn from that? Where were some of the barriers to get medications to market? That's been driving some of the drug price costs up quite a bit. So how do we actually look at that and become more efficient, better, but still safe, right? Because I think that's been the biggest concern, where people are like, wow, it was rushed, it was super quick, how safe is it? But we know no steps were skipped, they were just done in parallel. And then just some of the other things that have been really, really coming up, and I'm not sure how other industries are dealing with that, but there has been a lot of discussion in healthcare in particular around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then just issues around racism and structural racism and things like that we've really had to come to terms with in the healthcare industry, because there have been people that have had less access to care, have been more, they've experienced the most death. And so they've been the frontline workers that didn't have the luxury of working remotely. It is the frontline workers that really struggled to be able to do that. So those are all the things that we're dealing with. Some positive things, though, are that there has been a tremendous interest in going into healthcare. A lot of younger people have decided they want to become doctors because they saw the tremendous value that they gave, that they contributed to in society. So we are seeing enrollment rates in school go up, but we don't have enough of all kinds of workers at all levels, not just the physicians, but we need every kind of technician, MAs, RNs, LPNs. We need a lot of different workforce, and then specialty areas like behavioral health, where we know we're going to have a significant need and we're not keeping up with the demand on some of those areas.
Thanks a lot. That was great. So Tom does not see a lot of long-term impact in optics, and Sandra has mentioned several long-term changes in healthcare. Jamie and Callie, do you have any comments on long-term impacts of COVID in your industries?
So yes and no. Yes, because the China predicament is still really to be seen. Where we would also see some changes is when you have the displacement of people, right? So for health-related reasons, deaths, or if people are seeking a different level of healthcare infrastructure as a result of the COVID pandemic, when you have a displacement of people and you have a migration of people, the unfortunate nature of that is, as populations changes, then you have a rise in rebellion and terrorism within third world countries. And so what really comes out of that is, as people start to migrate, terrorist organizations historically have taken advantage of migrants, tried to exploit them. And then that's when you start to see these terrorist cells pop up in these different war-torn countries. So in the event that we have a large migration or a change in demographics or geographics as a result of the pandemic, the defense industry and basically the warfighter will see a dramatic change in the types of wars. That also goes to say that we also really don't know how this is going to play out, as far as will some of the countries like China and Russia and North Korea take advantage of some of the latency that was a result of the pandemic and start to infiltrate in different areas. So we'll have a pretty even trajectory right now, at least for the next 18 to 24 months, but a lot of that is still to be determined.
Jamie, do you have any comments about long-term impact on logistics?
Mark, yeah, I do. I think that you'll start to see things like for example, our own facilities here and the safety of our own workers. And I think that during COVID, we got to see and that lots of federal officials understand business and they get it, and they understand that our success as businessmen or our industries is really based on how successful they are. So for example, Customs and Border Protection, they really made a tremendous effort to keep our lanes open and to keep the flow of trade open. And they struggled through, multiple months of depleted agents at the border. Yet for commercial lanes, it was very important for CBP to leave those open for the time periods that they had promised, and they really struggled. So I think that that's one of the things that we learned. They learned that they are part of our success, and we learned that they are a great part of our success in federal partners. I don't think that, probably before this, a lot of people thought that most federal agencies were adversaries to business, but they're not. They can actually be very great partners in our business communities. I think a lot of the things that we saw as well is efficiency. We're looking toward more non-intrusive technology to get our trucks inspected across the border as fast as possible. And non-intrusive technology encompasses many different things, whereas before it was just pretty much a big bulky x-ray machine. Now there is some technology out there that's being implemented here at the Mariposa Port of Entry that are on a trial basis that will probably be implemented along the northern and the southern borders at different ports of entry as well. And then they don't have to be land ports either. A lot of the technology we're taking is from the seaports and from the airports as well. So I think that those are some of the things that we'll see in our business change quite a bit. We'll see a lot more efficient crossing, and our crossing times will go down. Mariposa Port of Entry does a tremendous job in doing that, and CBP as well. But I think one of the other things that will also be a big change is our infrastructure. I think you'll start to see more ports of entry like Mariposa be remodeled so that we can accommodate more trucks. Through this port of entry, we crossed 360,000 trucks last year. We had in 2020, there was an increase of 1%, but for 2021, we are at an 8.6% increase already through this fiscal year, through 2021. So that's extremely encouraging as far as what we're seeing. And infrastructure is part of that, having a strong, efficient, and modern port of entry, and also the road system to get it to market and to get it distributed throughout the United States, whatever it may be. We're right smack in the middle of a $134 million project here in Nogales, Arizona, which is the Mariposa SR 189 reconstruction that will get our trucks from the border to the highway to our distribution centers in Rio Rico or within here in Nogales, and on to their markets throughout the country very much quicker than we were before. So we need to recognize these challenges, and we need to work toward them, although they take sometimes they take years to negotiate these. The Nogales Port of Entry, the Mariposa Port of Entry took 10 years, but we were shovel ready when the opportunity came about. And we were shovel ready when the opportunity for the expansion of Mariposa came out as well. And now we're working on a feasibility study to remodel the DeConcini Port of Entry to get back our vehicle and pedestrian traffic into Arizona and for the economic benefit of Arizona. Hispanic travelers, they spend about $9 million a day in our state. And that could be from watching a basketball game in Phoenix to, doing banking in Nogales, Arizona, or in Tucson, going to pay their property taxes for their second home. It's a myriad of different reasons why we have this great trade. So I think there are some opportunities, and there will be some changes.
Mark, could I just modify my answer a little bit after listening to these other?
Sure.
What I'd like to say is that I think a lot of the things that there's going to be some changes, and you might say, well, it wasn't because of the pandemic, but they indirectly are because they get accelerated. So in healthcare, they've talked about telemedicine for years. They've talked about teleeducation for years. And then you have a pandemic and you find out, or telework, and you find out, well, maybe we can do a little more than we did before. So I do think it won't change as much as we thought a year ago. We thought this is going to, is a singularity, it's going to change everything. But meanwhile, you have the trade war. It had already started. Did the pandemic play into that? Yeah, it did. So it probably accelerated some things that were happening already that I might be dismissing a little too casually. Let me say that. Just a little nuance to my answer.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you, Tom. A question did come in for Callie while we're talking about the long-term impacts. Jan asks, you mentioned DoD emphasis / interest in additive manufacturing, et cetera. Are there other technologies or innovations that you're seeing where funding is growing?
Absolutely. So number one, I mentioned briefly the hybridization of technology. DoD, DOE, especially, even Homeland Security is putting a lot of emphasis on hybrid technologies. So trying to integrate electrically actuated systems rather than fuel or battery. Rather than fuel, and in an effort to really reduce operating footprints. Also, they're seeing that as a way to increase security because the less of a footprint you have, the less of infrastructure that you require. Therefore, you have a much smaller footprint and an increase in security. Another big focus is climate change and climate mitigation. This is as a result of historically, and I alluded to this just a little bit in the previous question, as we undergo climate change, we're, in addition to kind of the pandemic the scenario, we're starting to see a demographic change in people, and this and similar to the pandemic of what I just mentioned, as we see a demographic change and we see a migration of people, that is when organizations, terrorist organizations, kind of take an uprising. So a lot of the DoD budget right now is focused on anything that has to do with water purification, climate change, anything that has to do with kind of maintaining what we have right now to keep people from being displaced. They're putting a lot of emphasis on that as well.
Very interesting. If anyone else in the audience has questions, we have 7 minutes left. You can still send those in. I thought I could fill these last 5 minutes until the questions come in with a little bit of information from Eller's forecasting unit. Which is not me. I am reporting what my smart colleagues have produced, but Eller does have a periodic publication called Arizona's Economy or Arizona Today, and it's available on the Eller website. And I wanted to mention a few highlights concerning the recovery out of the most recent edition of that. One of the And again, I'll if another question comes in, I'll halt that and take the question. That's a priority. One of the big impact, we all know that COVID affected employment and drove unemployment up. It might not be universally appreciated how differential the impacts have been on sector, although our panelists are probably pretty aware of that. I have one graphic I wanted to show out of Eller's most recent report, if I could share this. Are you seeing this?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Try again, Mark. I had.
Oh, wait, I think I, like I say, I think I messed up. Just a second. Sorry about that. As I say, I've been teaching remotely for months now. You'd think I'd have mastered all of this by now. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not getting it. Well, what the point I wanted to make, and as I say, this is on Eller's website. Sorry about that. The, oh, is it here? Sorry, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for the delay. Is the hugely differential impact across sectors. And leisure, I mean, this is not a surprise. Leisure and hospitality has taken a huge hit. Government's taken a big hit. Some of this might not be quite as obvious. Professional business services has taken a big hit, and education's taken some of a hit. And to no one's surprise, trade, transportation, utilities is a sector that has seen big employment growth during this downturn or during this COVID event. Now, the forecast is that a lot of these areas will recover. So the request, they're expecting that just for example, leisure and hospitality went down rapidly, that it will recover rapidly. But whether it all recovers to where it was before is not quite known. And I think the discussion of the last few minutes shows that there will be some permanent changes. And then I wanted to stop share. Okay, and then I wanted to mention a few data out of the report. If there's another question comes in while I'm talking, then just interrupt me, Carla, and we'll take with that. So
Thank you, Mark. Actually,
Oh,
Tom, I actually really liked your comment when we started talking about the education piece and how do we inspire. John, do you want to go ahead and share your comment with
yeah,
the rest?
please do.
What was that question for?
Sorry, John made a comment on the chat,
Oh,
and we were
okay.
talking about how do we inspire
Oh,
our young individuals, and how do we promote the benefits of these careers? So I don't know, John, are you still on the line?
I
there it
am.
is.
If
Yeah.
you want to share your comment, that'd be great.
One of the things that I've got this education background plus the computer science, but from the education side, and Mark was on the school board. He's probably familiar with this, but it's real key that we need to get to these students as they're coming up and starting to make career decisions, and many of those decisions are guided by school counselors. And while we have a shortage of counselors, but that's where they start guiding students in certain directions based upon some testing they see and interest as well. Another thing that I ran into, and I was on a panel several years ago now on workforce decisions, and this is maybe not a very popular thing to say, but you've got to convince the mothers that the career that they're going to send their student into is a good one, that they're going to be able to make money, have a sustainable life, and those kind of things. And both of those things happen at the high school level at a minimum. And so we got JTED, we've got these other programs, but we need to get the emphasis to start some of those things at that level. That was my thought.
Thank you, John. Thank you for sharing that. Mark, thank you so much for moderating and for leading the conversation. I also want to extend my thank you to Barbara for her moderating on the first panel. Thank you all so much for participating this morning. I really want to send out a thank you and an appreciation for our distinguished panelists for sharing your subject matter expertise this morning. I want to leave you all with a few words that I wrote down during the whole conversation today. And I'm inspired by Susan that asked us to share, or sorry, Barbara, that asked us to share a few words that determine how we move forward. And some of your words were inspiration, sustainability, opportunity, education, and technology. I think that the formula for moving and growing and building tomorrow, it's going to be together. It's the collaboration and partnership of the business community, the education community, the tech industry community. I think that we can do this and very much align with our topic today, building tomorrow together. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate you sticking with us through the panels and joining in the conversation through your questions. For more information about future virtual events, please visit our website at aztechcouncil.org. We look forward to seeing you in person this coming July. We'll be sure to share more information about other upcoming events through our email. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.